Drinking alcohol, smoking, and drug use are harmful to health.
Evelyn had always despised hospitals. The sterile stench of antiseptic clawed at her throat, and the fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects, casting a pallor over everything. But when her younger brother Matthew slipped into a sudden coma, she had no choice. St. Augustine's Medical Center loomed like a monolith on the edge of town, its concrete facade cracked and weathered, as though the building itself were decaying. The doctors called Matthew's condition idiopathic encephalopathy, a fancy way of saying they were clueless. No cause, no cure, just a boy who wouldn't wake up. For 3 nights, Evelyn sat vigil by his bedside in the pediatric ICU, her hands clasped tightly around his limp fingers. Matthew, only 16, looked smaller than ever in the oversized hospital bed, his freckled face pale under the tangle of tubes and wires. She watched his chest rise and fall, mechanical and lifeless, waiting for any sign, a twitch of his eyelids, a squeeze of her hand, anything. The doctors insisted he wasn't brain dead, just asleep, but their reassurances felt hollow, like promises made to a ghost. On the 4th night, everything changed. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the air in the ward turned frigid, as though someone had opened a window to a winter storm. Evelyn shivered, rubbing her arms through her thin sweater. The heart monitor beeped steadily, its green line unwavering. She glanced at Matthew, and her breath caught. His body was still, but his lips were moving, forming silent words, like a puppet with invisible strings. She leaned closer, heart pounding. "Matthew," she whispered, her voice trembling. His lips shaped 2 words, faint but unmistakable. "Behind you." A chill slithered down her spine. She whipped around, expecting to see a nurse or doctor in the fluorescent-lit corridor beyond the glass partition. But it was empty, the hallway stretching into shadow, the only sound her own ragged breathing echoing off the linoleum. When she turned back, Matthew was motionless again, his face slack, lips still. Had she imagined it? The cold lingered, sinking into her bones, and the ward felt wrong, as though the air itself were watching her. Evelyn couldn't shake the unease that clung to her like damp cloth. The next night, she came prepared. Her phone, fully charged, rested in her lap, its camera app open and ready to record. She wasn't sure what she expected to capture, but she needed proof, something to convince herself she wasn't losing her mind. The hospital felt different now, its corridors too quiet, the shadows too deep. Even the nurses, usually bustling with forced cheer, seemed subdued, their eyes darting nervously when they thought no one was watching. At 3:12 a.m., the temperature plunged again, sharp and unnatural. Goosebumps prickled Evelyn's skin as she hit record, her hands trembling. Matthew's lips began to move, and this time, a faint whisper rasped from his throat, barely audible, like wind scraping through dry leaves. "The Hollow One is here." Her pulse thundered in her ears. "What? Who?" she hissed, leaning so close she could feel the faint warmth of his breath. "Matthew, please." His eyes snapped open, wide and unseeing, pupils dilated into black voids that seemed to swallow the light. His mouth twisted into a grin, too wide, too wrong, like a mask stretched over something not human. In a voice that wasn't his, deep, guttural, layered with echoes, he spoke again. "You let it in when you looked." The heart monitor shrieked, its lines spiking wildly before settling back into rhythm. Matthew's face slackened, his eyes closing as though nothing had happened. Evelyn's hands shook as she stopped the recording, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She played it back, desperate for clarity. Her own voice came through clearly, trembling but distinct. "What? Who?" But when Matthew's voice should have followed, there was only static, a harsh, grating buzz that made her wince, as though something had chewed the words to pieces. She replayed it again, then a third time, but the result was the same. Her voice, then static, then silence. Whatever Matthew had said, or whatever had spoken through him, was gone, erased by something that didn't want to be heard. The days blurred into a haze of exhaustion and dread. Evelyn barely left the hospital, surviving on vending machine coffee and stale sandwiches. She couldn't leave Matthew, not after that night, but St. Augustine's was changing. Or perhaps she was only now seeing it for what it was. The hospital felt alive, its walls pulsing with a subtle malice. Shadows seemed to linger too long at the edges of her vision, vanishing when she turned to look. Reflections in the glass partitions and windows didn't always match her movements. Sometimes her reflection lagged, or its expression was wrong, a faint smirk where her face should have been drawn with worry. The staff weren't immune either. Nurse Clara, a kind woman with a warm smile, went missing from her station one night, only to reappear hours later in the break room, pale and glassy-eyed. When Evelyn asked where she'd been, Clara blinked slowly, as though waking from a dream, and insisted she'd never left. Another nurse, a young man named Tom, stopped mid-sentence during a conversation with Evelyn, his gaze fixing on something over her shoulder. When she turned, there was nothing there, but Tom's face had drained of color, and he excused himself, muttering about needing air. And then there was the whispering. It started the night after Matthew's warning, always at 3:12 a.m., like clockwork. It wasn't just Matthew anymore. The whispers came from everywhere, hissings from the air vents, murmurs from darkened stairwells, a low rasp from beneath her brother's bed. They were indistinct, a chorus of voices overlapping, but one phrase repeated, chilling her to her core. The hollow one. Evelyn tried to research the term, scouring her phone for any mention of hollow one in local legends or medical anomalies, but found nothing. She asked the nurses, the doctors, even the janitor, but they all shrugged, their eyes sliding away from hers, as though they didn't want to linger on the question. She felt like she was shouting into a void, her pleas for answers swallowed by the hospital's oppressive silence. On the seventh night, Evelyn's exhaustion won. She hadn't slept properly in days, her eyes burning, her thoughts fraying at the edges. She sat in the hard plastic chair beside Matthew's bed, her phone clutched in her lap, the recording app open as always. The ward was quiet. The other patients, mostly elderly or critically ill, hidden behind curtains or sleeping under the dim glow of monitors. She didn't mean to fall asleep, but her eyelids grew heavy, and the world slipped away. She woke to silence. Not the usual hum of hospital machinery or the soft snores of sleeping patients, but a total unnatural void, as though sound itself had been sucked out of the world. Her skin prickled, and she sat up, her heart hammering. The ward was wrong. Every patient, dozens of them, men and women, young and old, was sitting upright in their beds, their heads turned toward her in perfect unison, their eyes wide and empty, pupils dilated into black pits. Their mouths opened slowly, and in a rasping, synchronized whisper, they spoke a single word: hollow. Evelyn's scream tore from her throat, raw and primal, as she stumbled to her feet, knocking the chair over. The lights flickered, plunging the ward into brief darkness. In that split second, she saw it. Something impossibly tall and thin standing in the doorway, its limbs too long, its body a distorted silhouette. Where its head should have been was a gaping black hollow, a void that seemed to pull at the edges of reality, threatening to swallow everything. The lights snapped back on, and it was gone. Evelyn didn't wait to see if it would return. She bolted for the door, her sneakers squeaking against the linoleum, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The corridor stretched endlessly before her, the fluorescent lights flickering like a dying pulse. She ran, her footsteps echoing, but the sound felt muted, as though the hospital itself were absorbing it. She reached a stairwell, the metal door cold under her hands as she shoved it open. The air inside was frigid, sharp as knives in her lungs. The shadows seemed to move, slithering closer when she blinked, retreating when she stared too long. She descended, her hands gripping the railing, her mind screaming at her to keep moving, to get out. At the bottom of the stairs, the glass doors leading outside loomed ahead. Freedom. The night beyond was dark, the parking lot empty except for a few scattered cars under flickering streetlights. Evelyn sprinted, her reflection flashing in the glass. She skidded to a halt, her breath catching. The reflection wasn't right. In the glass, she wasn't running. She was standing still, smiling, a slow, unnatural smile that stretched too wide, her eyes empty, black pools. Her chest. It was wrong. A hollow space gaped where her heart should have been, a dark void that pulsed with its own rhythm. Her reflection raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. Evelyn froze, her body trembling, as she felt cold fingers press against her own from her side of the glass. Impossible, but real. The touch like ice seeping into her bones. She stumbled back, her scream caught in her throat as her reflection stepped forward, out of the glass. Its movements were jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings, and the world behind Evelyn dissolved into darkness. Evelyn didn't remember what happened next. Her memories fractured, splintered into flashes. The cold touch of her reflection's hand, the sensation of falling into a void, the sound of her own voice screaming her name, only for it to echo back wrong. Hollow. When she came to, she was back in Matthew's ward, slumped in the chair beside his bed. The clock read 3:15 a.m. The other patients were asleep, their monitors beeping softly, as though nothing had happened. Her phone was gone. She searched frantically under the chair, in her pockets, but it was nowhere. The nurse's station was empty, the corridor silent. She tried to tell herself it was a dream, a hallucination born of stress and sleeplessness, but the cold lingered in her fingers, and her reflection in the ward's glass partition seemed off. It moved when she did, but its edges were blurred, its smile too sharp. The next day, Matthew was gone. The doctor said he'd been transferred to a specialist facility upstate, but they couldn't, or wouldn't, give her details. His bed was stripped, the room sanitized, as though he'd never been there. When she demanded answers, the staff looked at her with pity, their voices soft, their eyes avoiding hers. "You need rest, Ms. Carter," they said. "You're under a lot of stress." But Evelyn knew better. Something was wrong with St. Augustine's. The hospital was a trap, a place where reality frayed at the edges, where something ancient and hungry waited. She tried to leave, to walk out the front doors, but every time she approached them, her reflection stared back, its hollow eyes locking onto hers, its smile promising something terrible. Evelyn stopped sleeping. She couldn't, not when the whispering returned every night at 3:12 a.m., louder now, more insistent. It wasn't just in the hospital anymore. It followed her to the cafeteria, to the parking lot, to the tiny motel room she rented nearby. when the nurses insisted she couldn't stay in the ward 24/7. The whispers spoke of the hollow one, of a presence that had always been there, waiting for someone to notice it, to look too closely. She started seeing it everywhere. A shadow in the corner of her eye, too tall, too thin, gone when she turned. A flicker in the motel's bathroom mirror, her reflection's eyes black for a split second before blinking back to normal. Once, she woke to find her motel window fogged over, as though someone had breathed on it from the inside, and in the condensation was a single word: hollow. She tried to leave town, packing her bag and driving toward the highway, but the road seemed to loop back, the hospital's silhouette always reappearing on the horizon, no matter how far she drove. Her phone, replaced after its mysterious disappearance, stopped working properly. Calls dropped, texts arrived garbled, and sometimes, at 3:12 a.m., it would play static, the same grating buzz from her lost recording. Desperate, Evelyn turned to the hospital's records, sneaking into the administrative wing late at night. The files were a labyrinth of bureaucracy, but she found patterns: patients who vanished without explanation, staff who quit abruptly, reports of unusual activity at 3:12 a.m., dating back decades. One file, buried in a dusty cabinet, mentioned a patient from 1953, a man who claimed something was watching him from the glass before he disappeared. His photo showed a gaunt figure with hollow eyes, his chest sunken, as though something had been carved out of him. The hospital was hiding something, or protecting it. On the 10th night, Evelyn returned to the hospital, armed with a flashlight, a pocket knife, and a desperate resolve. She couldn't leave, not without answers, not without Matthew. The corridors were darker than ever, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and something else, something metallic like blood. The whispering started early, a low hum that grew into a chorus of voices, all saying her name, all calling her to the pediatric ICU. She found Matthew's old room, now empty, the bed stripped to its metal frame. The glass partition reflected her image, but it was wrong again. Her reflection's chest was hollow, a black void pulsing where her heart should have been. She raised her flashlight, and the beam caught something in the corner of the room. A figure, tall and thin, its limbs too long, its head a featureless void, the hollow one. It didn't move, but she felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, like a weight pressing on her chest. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of voices screaming, "Hollow!" She clutched her knife, her hands shaking, and shouted, "What do you want? Where's my brother?" The figure tilted its head, or the void where its head should have been, and the room grew colder, the air thinning until she could barely breathe. Her reflection in the glass moved, stepping closer, its hollow eyes locked on hers. She swung her knife at the glass, shattering it, but the shards didn't fall. They hung in the air, reflecting fragments of her face, each one smiling, each one hollow. The hollow one stepped forward, its limbs bending at unnatural angles, and the world tilted. Evelyn felt herself falling, not down but inward, into the void in her reflection's chest. The last thing she saw was Matthew's face, not in the room but in her mind, his eyes black, his mouth whispering, "You let it in." Evelyn never left St. Augustine's. The staff say she checked out, but her car remains in the parking lot, keys still in the ignition. Matthew's records are gone, his transfer undocumented. The hospital continues its work, patients coming and going. But those who stay too long notice things. Shadows that don't belong, reflections that don't match, whispers at 3:12 a.m. Sometimes If you walk past the hospital's long windows at night, you might see her. Evelyn's reflection lingers in the glass, her smile too wide, her eyes black and hollow. She doesn't move, doesn't speak, but her gaze follows you. And if you look too long, you might feel cold fingers press against your own, as though something is reaching out from the other side. The hollow one is still there, waiting for the next person to look too closely, to let it in.